You don't do anything anymore. Watch my kids while I travel. That's what my daughter-in-law said to me on the phone. Not even a hello, not even respect. She just decided I had nothing better to do with my life now that I was retired. I held the phone for a second, then I smiled and said, "Sure." But inside, I wasn't agreeing. I was done being treated like I didn't matter. That call changed everything. For years, I kept quiet to keep the peace. This time, I decided to stay quiet for a different reason, because I already had a plan. And when she came back from her trip, she didn't recognize the woman standing in front of her. Stay with me till the end. You'll understand why silence can be louder than revenge. If you've ever been disrespected, this story will hit home. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 68 years old, a retired nurse and a widow. I live alone in the same small house my husband and I bought almost 40 years ago in Maple Hollow, Vermont. People say it's peaceful here, but peace feels different when you're alone. Most mornings are the same. I get up, make tea, and set 2 cups on the table. One for me and one for my husband, Thomas. He's been gone for 6 years now, but I still can't stop setting that second cup. I tell myself it's just habit, but maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's my way of pretending he's still here. There's a photo of us on our wedding day hanging by the kitchen. He was wearing the same tie he wore to every special occasion. He used to say, "If it's lucky once, it'll be lucky again." That was Thomas, simple, steady, kind. I still remember the day I said goodbye to him. He was lying in the hospital bed, barely strong enough to hold my hand. He looked at me and said, "Eve, someday they'll forget what you've done. When that happens, remind them who you are." I didn't understand what he meant then, but I do now. Life after that was quiet. I kept the house, his old clock, his tools, and a letter he wrote before he passed. I never opened it. I told myself I would when the time was right. But the truth is, I didn't want to. Reading it would make it final. After I retired from the clinic, I thought maybe I'd rest, travel a little, visit my son and his family more often. But people get busy. Calls become messages, messages become silence. Days blend into each other until one morning you realize no one has asked how you're doing in weeks. That morning was like any other. I was having my tea, reading an old magazine, when the phone rang. I looked at the screen and saw her name, Sabrina, my daughter-in-law. I hadn't heard from her in months. My heart lifted for a moment. I thought maybe she was calling to say hello. I was wrong. "Evelyn," she said, not even a greeting. "I'm dropping off the kids tomorrow. You'll watch them for 2 weeks while I travel." I didn't even have time to answer before she continued. "You don't do anything anymore anyway, so you can handle it. It's perfect." I sat there holding the phone, trying to process what she had just said. "Sabrina," I said quietly, "I'm not sure I can—" She cut me off. "You'll be fine. I'll text you what they eat in their schedules. Oh, and please no junk food this time. I don't want them getting sick again." Her voice was sharp, quick, and cold, like this was all decided already, like I didn't have a say. "I'm sorry, Sabrina," I said, "but I already have plans." She laughed, that fake little laugh she does when she wants to make you feel small. "Plans? What plans could you possibly have?" "You're retired, Evelyn. Don't make this difficult. It's just 2 weeks. I'll see you tomorrow morning." Then she hung up. I sat there, still holding the phone, staring at nothing. I didn't even realize how hard my heart was beating. I thought about Thomas's words again. Remind them who you are. I had spent my whole life taking care of people, Patience, my son, even Sabrina, when she first joined our family. And somehow, in her eyes, I had become nothing. Just an old woman with free time, waiting around to be useful again. That thought made something inside me tighten. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was more like a quiet promise forming in the back of my mind. I got up, walked to the shelf, and looked at that wooden box again, the one with the unopened letter inside. I didn't open it, but I placed my hand on it, like I was drawing strength from it. Then I said out loud, "All right, Thomas, I'll remind them." That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about what kind of person Sabrina had become, always chasing the next business trip, the next scheme, the next thing that made her feel superior. My son, Michael, worked himself to exhaustion, and she spent his money like it was hers alone. And now she wanted me to clean up after her again, watching her children, cooking, managing her chaos, because in her mind I had nothing better to do. But this time she picked the wrong woman. The next morning I wrote a few lines in my old notebook. I hadn't touched it since Thomas died, but it felt right. The words came easily. They call me only when they need me. And this time, they need a babysitter, not a mother. I looked at what I had written and underlined it twice. Then I added, they're about to remember who I really am. It wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But I needed her to see me again, to remember that I'm not someone she can use or dismiss. As I closed the notebook, the phone buzzed, a new message from Sabrina. We'll be there at 7 a.m. Don't be late. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I put the phone down, made myself another cup of tea and whispered, let's see how ready you really are, Sabrina. That was the day everything changed. Sabrina's voice came over the line like an order, not a question. Evelyn, Ryan says you're free, right? I have to go on a business trip for 2 weeks. You can watch the kids for me. She didn't wait to let me answer. It was always like that with her. Quick, efficient, no small talk. I asked, careful at first, where are you going? As if the place would make a difference. Maldives, she said, it's a work thing. Don't worry, you'll be fine. It's only 2 weeks. Then she added like a small sting, you don't do anything anyway, so you can handle it. It'll be helpful. That last part landed harder than I expected. Helpful. It sounded like she was doing me a favor, like I needed her permission to be useful. I could hear Ryan in the background, muffled, thanks, Mom. You're the best. He sounded tired, the kind of tired that comes from too many hours at work and not enough sleep. He didn't argue. He never did when Sabrina made decisions like this. I said, Sabrina, I have plans. I'm not just sitting at home waiting for someone to drop things on my doorstep. I tried to keep my voice steady. She laughed that little laugh she uses to cut things short. Plans? Evelyn, what plans could you possibly have? You're retired? Don't make this difficult. It's 2 weeks. We'll be there at 7 tomorrow. She hung up. No goodbye. No thank you. Just a click like she closed a tab. I sat with the phone in my hand longer than I should have, listening to the quiet after the call. The house felt colder somehow, like the words had taken some warmth out of the air. I thought about everything she'd said, about how she reduced my life to not doing anything, about how she had the nerve to tell me what to do in my own home. People change when they think money or influence gives them the right to treat others like furniture. They forget there are real people behind the chores and the schedules. I thought of Thomas. He used to tell me not to let small cruelties go unchallenged. One day, he said once, holding my hand, someone will test you beyond being polite. Don't let them forget who you are. I had laughed then and told him he was being dramatic. He wasn't. That night I could not sleep. I kept replaying the call in my head, every clipped sentence, every dismissive laugh. It wasn't anger that kept me awake. It was the way her words made me feel invisible. You don't notice it at first, the way family starts to treat you like a convenience. A birthday skipped here, a holiday missed there. Then one day someone decides they can borrow your time in your house like nothing matters. I made a list. Not a dramatic list, just practical things. Their allergies, the kids' meds, what each of them hated to eat, Leo's bedtime routine, where Mason hid his charger, the password to the TV. I wrote down Dr. Alvarez's number, the number for school, emergency contacts. I went through the motions because that's what I'd always done. Plan, organize, prepare. Being prepared makes you useful in a different way. Still, I knew I couldn't let this be the same as before. I would not let Sabrina come in 2 weeks from now and expect the same obedient grandmother who smiled and took insults as fact. Something in me had shifted the moment she said, "You don't do anything." It was a small phrase, but it woke old memories of being overlooked, of giving everything and getting little back. So I set the rules for myself. No screaming, no dramatics, nothing that would make a scene and feed her story. I would be calm. I would keep records. I would listen. I would watch. That was my decision, to respond with quiet action instead of loud anger. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose my temper. I would make sure that when she returned, she would not be able to pretend she hadn't left these children behind for her own comfort. Before bed, I opened the box Thomas left me. I read his letter for the first time. He had written about small things, how he loved my hands, how proud he was of the life we built. At the bottom, in his careful handwriting, he wrote, "When they forget, remind them gently but firmly who you are." I folded the letter and put it back. I slept poorly, but I slept with purpose. Morning came with a thin gray light. I made the house ready in the neat, ordinary ways I always did. Fresh sheets, small emergency kit, Snacks lined up where the kids could reach them. I also hid a small digital recorder under the dining table. Nothing dramatic, just something that could help me remember what happened, in case words ever changed. It felt a little like wearing a seatbelt. You don't think you need it until you do? When the car pulled up at 7 the next morning, I opened the door and saw 3 faces I loved and did not yet know at all. They shuffled out of the SUV with their backpacks and their attitude, Mason with his phone, Ella clutching her sketchbook, little Noah rubbing his eyes. Sabrina didn't come in. She waved from the driveway and mouthed, "Be good," like she'd left a package at the post office. They came inside and looked around like strangers. Mason rolled his eyes when I suggested breakfast was ready. Ella hugged the sketchbook to her chest and spoke softly, and Noah asked for cartoons. I kept my voice steady. I gave them pancakes, not junk food, but pancakes with a little syrup because kids need small comforts. I told them a simple rule. We respect the house and we respect each other. If someone did wrong, we fixed it. Somewhere in the back of my mind, Thomas's words kept coming back to me. I'd been a nurse all my life. I knew the signs of neglect, of children used as tools in adult fights. I watched them closely while they moved through the house, caught small things, a bruise on a knee, a flinch when someone raised their voice on a phone call, the way they hesitated sharing a story as if someone might punish them for telling the wrong thing. By noon, I had more evidence than I'd expected. Not evidence for court yet, but enough to know that I couldn't simply hand them back 2 weeks later and pretend nothing had happened. That knowledge didn't make me cruel. It made me careful. It made me ready. And as the sun slid behind the trees that afternoon, I wrote in my notebook once more. They call when they need me. They don't come for me when they should. This time I will keep my eyes open. That sentence felt small on the page, but heavy in my chest. It would be the quiet engine of those next 2 weeks. Sabrina thought she was dropping her burden off and moving on. She expected convenience. What she didn't expect was that I would watch and remember. Her words, "You'll be helpful," followed me like a shadow all night. I knew the next morning would be the start of the quietest fight of my life. Sabrina's SUV pulled up right on time the next morning, 7 o'clock sharp, like she was making a delivery. She didn't even get out of the car. She just rolled down the window, sunglasses on, hair perfect, phone in hand. The back door opened and 3 kids stepped out, 3 little pieces of the same broken picture. "Bye," she said, waving with one hand while scrolling with the other. "Be good, okay?" No hugs, no kisses, just an engine starting again. By the time I opened the door, she was already halfway down the street. I looked at them. Mason, 13, taller than I expected, wearing a hoodie pulled low and earbuds in his ears. He didn't even look at me, just asked, "Do you have Wi-Fi here? Because Mom said your internet's slow." I smiled a little. "It works fine for me." He sighed, rolling his eyes like I just told him we didn't have electricity. Ella, 10, stood behind him holding a sketchbook. She was small, quiet, eyes down, hair falling into her face. She clutched that book like it was the only safe thing she owned. Noah, 6, ran straight up to me and asked the first thing that came to his mind. "Grandma, why did Mom say you're poor?" I didn't answer right away. Kids repeat what they hear. I knelt down beside him and said, "I'm not poor, sweetheart. I just have everything I need." He smiled like that made perfect sense. I led them inside. Mason dragged his suitcase across the floor. Ella looked around slowly, taking in the old photos, the smell of cinnamon, the ticking clock that had been running since before she was born. Noah ran straight to the couch and jumped on it. "Shoes off, please," I said softly. He stopped confused, then slipped them off without a word. We started the morning quietly. I made breakfast, pancakes, nothing fancy. Ella sat at the table sketching while Mason stared at his phone. Noah hummed to himself. Halfway through breakfast, Mason spoke without looking up. "Mom says we have to eat healthy here, no syrup." I looked at him. "Do you like syrup?" He shrugged. "Yeah." "Then have some." I poured a small line across his plate. He looked surprised but didn't say anything. It was a small moment, but I noticed how fast he ate after that. Sometimes children don't need big things. They just need someone to say yes. Later, Ella brought her sketchbook over. "Do you want to see my drawing?" she asked softly. I nodded. On the page was a picture of her family and her dad, her mom, Mason, and herself. But there was a crack drawn right through the middle, separating her parents. "That's a very good drawing," I said. Why the line? She hesitated. Because they don't like each other all the time. I didn't ask more. Sometimes children tell you everything they can handle with just one sentence. That afternoon, they all settled into different corners of the house. Mason found the couch and didn't move. Ella sat by the window drawing more. Noah kept following me, asking questions about everything. The clock, the photos, why I had so many teacups. Because when you get older, I told him, people give you things instead of time. He didn't understand, but he laughed anyway. By evening, I had made dinner. Chicken, mashed potatoes, peas. The kind of food that fills the room with something warm, even if nobody says much. The kids sat at the table, half interested, half somewhere else in their own heads. Mason pulled out his phone and turned up a video. I recognized Sabrina's voice before I saw the screen. She was in a new kitchen, bright and staged, smiling into the camera. "My mother-in-law is the sweetest woman," she said. "She helps with everything. She's just happy to be useful." Mason laughed a little. "Mom says you love babysitting." I looked at the screen. She called me sweet, but the tone told another story. That word useful echoed in my mind again. I didn't say anything. I just stood up and started clearing plates. Ella looked at me worried, as if she expected me to be upset. But I wasn't angry. I was tired. Tired in a way that goes past sleep. After dinner, they went upstairs. Mason claimed the guest room, saying it was too small, but he took it anyway. Ella and Noah shared the bigger room with 2 beds. I made sure they brushed their teeth, turned off the lights, and told them good night. When the house finally went quiet, I sat down with my notebook. I hadn't written in it for years, not since Thomas died. I flipped through the old pages. The last thing written there was his handwriting. "When they forget, remind them who you are." I took my pen and started writing again. They think I'm useless, but even useless people can pay attention. I paused, looked toward the ceiling where the faint sound of Mason's music played through the floorboards. Tomorrow I'll start noticing everything, not for revenge, but to understand how a family can grow this cold. The pen moved slower after that, but my mind was wide awake. For years, I had watched families in hospitals fall apart under stress, loss, or pride, but it was different when it was your own. You think you raised your child to be kind, to recognize love when he sees it. Then one day you meet his wife and realize she'd never learned how to give or receive it. Before going to bed, I made a small plan. I would treat these children the way I once treated my patients, carefully, quietly, without judgment. People reveal the truth faster when they feel safe. I would let the kids talk, let them show me what their world looked like when the adults weren't pretending. When I turned off the lights that night, I could hear the house breathing again, 3 new sounds mixed with mine. A teenager's sigh, a little girl's pencil scratching paper, a boy whispering to himself in the dark. I whispered back, "Good night," to no one in particular. Then I opened my notebook one more time and underlined the last sentence I wrote. They think I'm just watching the kids. But I'm watching more than that. They see me as a quiet old woman. But tomorrow, I'll start paying attention. Not to fight them, but to understand why love turned into distance. By the 3rd day, I had already learned the rhythm of the house with the kids in it. It wasn't calm, but it was predictable. Breakfast, arguments, screens, quiet. Then the next day, the same thing again. Sabrina had left me a printed list on the counter before she left. It was long, highlighted, and underlined, like I was a nanny being trained. At the top, in big letters, it said, "No sugar, no milk, strict bedtime, 8 p.m. sharp." The rest was a schedule, snacks, screen limits, approved phrases, and a note at the end that said, "Please follow this exactly. Kids do better with discipline." I read the list twice, then folded it and put it in the drawer. I had raised a child before. I didn't need instructions from someone who still thought bedtime was optional, but I followed what I could. I didn't want to give Sabrina another excuse to accuse me of being careless. That first night with the strict rules, Mason complained right away. "Seriously? No Wi-Fi after 9? Mom lets me use it all night." Ella looked down, tracing the edge of her cup. "Mom says screens are bad for our eyes." Mason rolled his eyes. "Yeah, she says that while she's on her phone till 2 a.m.? I didn't answer. There are moments when silence says enough. At dinner, I served soup and bread. Noah pushed the bowl away. "Mom says we can have cereal instead," he said. I smiled. "Well, Mom's not here right now, and this soup's staying warm only for a few minutes." He frowned but started eating anyway. After dinner, the chaos began. Mason refused to hand over his phone. Ella cried because her mother always read to her before bed, and now no one did. Noah jumped on the couch until he knocked over a lamp. I didn't yell. I picked up the lamp, fixed what I could, and sent them to their rooms one by one. Mason slammed the door, Ella sniffled quietly, and Noah finally fell asleep mid-sentence. When the house went quiet again, I sat down in the kitchen. My tea had gone cold. I stared at the list Sabrina had written and thought about all the words that weren't on it. Love, patience, hugs, laughter, everything that should have been there but wasn't. I started cleaning, wiping counters, folding towels, putting toys away. It wasn't about the mess, it was about control. Cleaning was something I could fix when everything else felt broken. While putting the list back in the drawer, something caught my eye, a white envelope with Ryan's name on it. It was under a few of Sabrina's printed bills, half buried like it wasn't supposed to be found. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. It was a notice from the bank. A late mortgage statement from a property in Boston. The amount was big, too big for the son I raised. There was a red line near the bottom. Final notice before foreclosure? I sat down slowly, holding the paper in both hands. I read it again and again, hoping it was a mistake. My son was, drowning in debt. And Sabrina hadn't said a word. I thought back to every time she'd bragged about new trips, new handbags, their investment house. It was all lies built on money they didn't have. And Ryan, my sweet, quiet Ryan, had become a shadow of himself. I could see it clearly now. She had her hands on everything, the house, the finances, the children, even the way he spoke. He couldn't move without her permission. I had seen people like her before, controlling, polished, always pretending to do what's best for the family. They start by isolating, then they convince everyone they're the only one who knows what's right. I used to deal with families like that at the hospital. The controlling spouse, the exhausted parent, the silent children. You recognize it by the way the others shrink when that person walks into the room. And suddenly, it wasn't just about the kids anymore. It was about Ryan, my son. I held the paper tighter. I remembered the times he'd called me over the years. His voice always tired, always rushing. He'd say, "Sorry, Mom, can't talk long. Sabrina needs me to check something." I had thought he was just busy. I hadn't realized he was being managed. I sat there for a long time with the bank notice in my hands. My chest felt heavy, but my mind was clear. I whispered to myself, I used to save people at their worst moments. I can do it again. I wasn't a nurse anymore, but the instinct never leaves you. You see pain, you act. You see someone bleeding out, you find where it starts. This wasn't about medicine anymore. It was about truth. If my son couldn't see what was happening, then I would have to show him. That night, I didn't write in my notebook. I didn't need to. The words were already burned into my head. If they see me as the babysitter, then I'll observe like a professional. I checked the locks on the doors, made sure the kids were sleeping, and went back to the kitchen. I folded the bank letter neatly and put it back exactly where I found it. Then I sat at the table and made another list. Not of chores, but of what I needed to learn. I would watch, listen, collect every small truth that Sabrina had tried to hide. Because in my life, I had seen what happens when people ignore the signs, when they decide that keeping peace is more important than facing reality. Not this time. This time, I wasn't just keeping peace. I was preparing for war. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need shouting to be heard. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, I went to the back room. There was a small wooden shelf where Thomas used to keep his tools. His things were still there, dust on every surface, the smell of metal and old oil still faint. On the second shelf sat the clock he built years ago, the one he used to call the heart of the house. It was simple, with a brass face and a slow, steady tick. But this clock had a secret. Inside, behind the gears, there was a small camera. It wasn't for spying back then. Thomas had added it after one of his surgeries when he wanted to document how the clock's mechanism moved, how life kept going even when you couldn't see the work behind it. After he died, I turned it off. I couldn't stand the blinking blue light. It reminded me too much of hospital monitors, the kind that beep right up until they stop. But now, sitting there, holding that same clock, I knew I had to turn it on again. The kids had been fighting all afternoon. Mason pushed Ella when she tried to talk to him, and Noah started crying because no one was listening. Mason yelled, Ella cried harder, and I just stood there between them, calm, firm, tired. I realized this wasn't normal. The anger didn't belong to children. It was borrowed, absorbed, repeated. They were living out something they had seen too many times. So I plugged the clock in. The small blue light blinked twice. The camera was alive again. The light reflected on my face, and for a second I saw my reflection in the glass. I didn't look like the woman who used to let things go. I looked like someone who was done pretending everything was fine. The phone rang while I was setting it up. It was Dr. Harper, an old friend from my years at the hospital. She was the one who had given us that camera in the first place. "Eve," she said, her voice low and serious, "if you're doing what I think you're doing, you're opening an old wound." I paused for a moment, staring at the little blue light. "No, Harper," I said. "I'm stitching it shut." She was quiet. Then she said, "Just be careful. When you start seeing the truth, you can't unsee it." I told her I understood. We hung up, and I sat there for a long while, listening to the soft ticking of the clock. It sounded like breathing. The next day, I placed it on the mantel where it used to sit. From there, it could see most of the living room and part of the kitchen. I didn't feel guilty. I wasn't trying to trap anyone. I just needed to see what was happening when no one thought I was watching. It didn't take long. That afternoon, while I was folding laundry, I heard shouting. Ella was crying again. Mason had grabbed her drawing and ripped it. He said it was stupid and that Mom would hate it anyway. I stepped in, calm, and told him to stop. He stormed off, slamming the door to the guest room. Ella sat on the floor, trying to tape her drawing back together. I knelt next to her and asked softly, "Do you know why he does that?" She shook her head. "Mom says boys are supposed to be tough." Her words were small but sharp. I hugged her, said nothing. Sometimes words only make it worse. That night, after everyone went to bed, I plugged the clock into my laptop. The small file loaded on the screen, blurry but clear enough to see the truth. Mason's anger, Ella's tears, Noah watching from the corner, silent and scared. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. I sent a short clip to Harper. I didn't explain much, just said, "Watch this." She called me back an hour later. "This isn't just kids fighting," she said. "This is psychological damage. You can hear it in the tone, the way they talk. It's coming from the adults, from home." Her words stayed with me. I had known it deep down, but hearing it out loud made it real. After that, I decided I would record everything. Not for revenge, but for proof. Proof that what was breaking this family wasn't age or distance or bad luck. It was neglect. It was disrespect turned into habit. The next few days, I kept the camera running. I didn't change my behavior. I just lived. And the clock watched. It saw Mason refuse to eat anything I made. It saw Ella quietly clean up after her brothers. It saw Noah ask if Mom will be mad that we're having fun. It captured all of it, the small cracks that everyone else ignored. At night, I'd sit by the laptop and replay moments. Not because I wanted to spy, but because I wanted to understand. You can't fix what you don't face. Harper called again one night and asked if I was okay. "I'm fine," I told her. "Just tired of pretending everything is normal." "You're not pretending anymore," she said. "You're documenting. That's the difference." I thought about that after we hung up. Maybe she was right. Maybe for the first time in a long while, I wasn't just enduring life. I was observing it, carefully, intentionally, like a nurse watching for symptoms. I walked to the window and looked outside. The snow was falling harder that night, heavy and quiet. It reminded me that the world can look peaceful even when it's freezing everything underneath. I looked back at the clock. The blue light blinked again, slow and steady. Thomas had made it to last a lifetime. He used to say, "This clock doesn't sleep, so the truth never will." And now, after all these years, that truth was finally waking up. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the wooden box. I had avoided opening it for years. It was the last thing Thomas ever made with his hands. Smooth corners, small brass hinges, a faint smell of cedar that never went away. He'd built it 2 months before he died. I remembered watching him polish it in the living room, the television on but ignored. When I asked him what it was for, he said, "Something you'll need when I'm not here." I thought it was another one of his practical jokes, the kind of thing he did to make me smile. I never thought he meant it literally. The box had followed me through every season since sitting quietly on that same shelf, collecting dust and questions. I'd cleaned around it, moved it once or twice, but never dared to open it. Until now. I ran my fingers along the lid before lifting it. Inside, there wasn't much. An old pocket knife, a keychain from our first car, and one envelope. The paper was yellowed, but his handwriting was clear. For Eve when she's ready. I took a deep breath and opened it. The first line stopped me cold. If the world forgets your kindness, teach it to remember through action. It was just like him. Short, simple, but enough to shake the air around me. I read the rest. You've spent your whole life taking care of others, and I worry that when I'm gone, you'll forget how strong that makes you. Kindness isn't weakness, Eve. It's power that people don't recognize because it doesn't shout. But when people start mistaking it for weakness, that's when you remind them. Not with anger, but with what you do next. I stopped reading and just sat there, holding the letter, trying to steady my breathing. It felt like he had written it for this exact moment. For the past few weeks, I'd been holding everything in. Sabrina's words, Ryan's silence, the kids' confusion, and all this time I thought staying quiet was the right thing to do, to keep peace, to avoid conflict. But Thomas had always seen further than I did. He knew the danger of letting people take your silence as surrender. I looked down at the rest of the letter. People will test your heart, Evelyn. They'll mistake it for softness. Don't let them. You don't need to fight to prove yourself. You just need to act. Steady, sure, and right. I smiled through the tears. It sounded exactly like him. He'd always believed that the best response to cruelty was clarity, not revenge, but truth. A memory came to me, as clear as if it were yesterday. We were driving home one winter night years ago when a storm hit. The snow was thick, the road nearly invisible. We saw a car slide off into a ditch. Thomas didn't hesitate for a second. He stopped the truck, grabbed his coat, and ran through the snow to help. I remember yelling after him to be careful. He looked back and shouted, "You don't wait for someone else to do what's right." When he came back, his face was red from the cold, but his eyes were alive. He said, "The world remembers people who act, not people who complain." I could still hear that line now, echoing in the same rhythm as the clock ticking behind me. I folded the letter carefully, the paper soft from age, and held it to my chest. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel cold. It wasn't the fire or the tea or the lamp. It was his words filling the space he used to occupy. Then I did something I'd never done before. I put the letter in the pocket of my cardigan instead of back in the box. I didn't want to hide it again. It wasn't a memory anymore. It was a promise. I looked out the window. The snow was falling, heavy but calm, like the world was quiet enough for me to think. I whispered, "All right, Thomas. I hear you. It's time." From that moment, I stopped thinking of myself as the tired old woman they left behind. I wasn't just surviving. I was preparing. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew this much. I wouldn't stay invisible anymore. It started like any other evening. The kids were upstairs finishing homework, the TV was on low, and I was folding laundry on the couch. For a few minutes, everything was peaceful, the kind of quiet that almost feels safe. Then Ella came down the stairs, clutching her sketchbook like she always did. She hesitated in the doorway, staring at me for a while before speaking. "Grandma," she said softly, "can I show you something?" I smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. What did you draw this time?" She sat beside me and opened the book to a page near the middle. It wasn't like her usual drawings of flowers or houses or her brothers. This one was different. It was her mother, Sabrina, standing next to a man wearing a black jacket. He had dark hair and sunglasses, and their hands were touching. I frowned a little. "That's your mom?" Ella nodded. "Uh-huh. And that's the man she was with." I kept my voice gentle. "Where did you see him?" She looked down at the page, nervous. On Mom's iPad, there was a picture. She told me not to tell anyone. She said it was work. My heart dropped, but I didn't let it show. I asked quietly, "Did Dad see the picture?" Ella shook her head. "No. Mom said it would make him sad." I felt something in me shift, like the air in the room had changed. Children don't lie about things like that. They just repeat what they see. I thanked her, told her it was a good drawing, and asked if she wanted to help me make cocoa. She smiled and ran to the kitchen, but I couldn't move. I sat there staring at the drawing, my fingers pressing into the page. When she went upstairs, I went to the kitchen and opened Sabrina's old messenger bag that she'd left in the hallway. The iPad was right there, unlocked, just like everything else she owned. She never believed anyone around her could outsmart her. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The email was right at the top of the inbox. Subject, Dominic, flight tickets, Miami. I tapped it open. There were photos attached. Sabrina in a red dress, standing next to the same man from Ella's drawing. One picture was of them laughing on a balcony. Another was of them kissing, her hand on his chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I scrolled down and saw a receipt. Hotel Bayview, 3 nights, double suite. The date was the same week she told Ryan she was on a business trip. My hand started shaking. I closed the iPad and held it against my chest, trying to slow my heartbeat. I thought about Ryan, my son, the man who used to call me every Sunday just to say goodnight. I thought about how tired he always sounded, how quickly he'd learned to defend her no matter what she did. I had blamed him for not standing up to her. Now I understood. He didn't even know what was happening. I turned the iPad back on and saved everything to a small flash drive I kept in the desk drawer. Older, habits die hard. Nurses keep records of everything. After that, I called Dr. Harper. She picked up on the second ring. Eve, it's late. What's wrong? I found something, I said. My voice came out steady, even though my hands were trembling. It's about Sabrina. Harper sighed softly like she already knew where this was going. What did she do? She's cheating, I said. And she's been lying about everything. The money, the trips, all of it. I heard Harper moving papers on her desk. Do you have proof? Yes, I said. I'm sending it to you now. While the files uploaded, I looked around the house. The kids' toys, the leftover dinner plates, the quiet hum of the heater. Everything looked so normal. But I knew this moment would change everything. Harper's voice came through again. Eve, I need you to be careful. You're walking into something complicated. This isn't just betrayal, it's manipulation. I took a deep breath. I know, but I can't let my son keep living in a lie. When the upload finished, I shut down the laptop. My reflection caught on the screen, pale, tired, but calm. Then it hit me, the memory I'd been trying to bury. Years ago, when Thomas and I were still young, he trusted a man, a friend, with his business. That man stole from him, left him with nothing but debt and disappointment. Thomas had called it a betrayal, but he never hated him for it. He just said, "You can't lie forever. The truth always finds its way to the surface." That memory burned in my chest now. The difference was that Thomas forgave because the lie didn't destroy his family. Sabrina's lie was doing exactly that. I stood by the window, snow still falling outside. The night looked endless, but it was quiet. The kind of quiet that gives you room to think. I whispered to myself, a liar can hide everything except the look in a mother's eyes. It wasn't anger that I felt then. It was something colder, steadier, a sense of purpose. This wasn't about catching her anymore. It was about saving what was left of my family. I turned off the lights and went upstairs. Before going to bed, I checked on each child, Mason asleep with his headphones still on, Ella clutching her sketchbook, Noah curled up at the edge of his blanket. Innocent, untouched by the storm above them, I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to their breathing. Then I whispered a promise, mostly to myself. I'm not afraid of the truth. I'm afraid of what happens if they keep living inside a lie. I walked back to my room, placed the flash drive next to Thomas's letter, and turned off the light. For the first time in years, I didn't feel helpless. I felt ready. It happened slowly, like fog lifting after a long night. The kids started to notice things, not because I told them, but because the truth was too big to hide anymore. One afternoon, Ella was sitting at the table drawing again. She looked quiet, but I could tell something was on her mind. After a while, she asked, "Grandma, why does Mom always smile on her videos but yell at us at home?" Her voice was soft, confused, not angry. She wasn't trying to judge her mother. She was trying to make sense of the world. I didn't know what to say at first. Children see more than we think, and they remember the parts we wish they'd forget. I took a deep breath and said, "Sometimes people show the world what they want it to see, not what's really there." She frowned. "But that's lying, isn't it?" "It is," I said. "But some people lie to themselves too. That's the hardest kind of lie to fix." She nodded slowly, then went back to her drawing. On the page, she sketched a small figure standing between two bigger ones, the space between them filled with gray. Later that evening, Mason was in the living room, scrolling through his phone. He wasn't talking much that week, quieter than usual, which worried me. Then suddenly he called out, "Grandma, look at this." He turned the phone toward me. It was a video Sabrina had posted on TikTok. In it, she was standing in her bright kitchen, smiling at the camera. "My mother-in-law," she said cheerfully, "is the sweetest woman. I don't know what I'd do without her." Then she laughed and added, "She's old-fashioned, but she tries." The comments below were full of hearts and compliments. "You're such a caring daughter-in-law. She's lucky to have you." Mason shook his head. "She only posts these when she's fighting with Dad. It makes her look nice." He didn't sound angry. He just sounded tired. I didn't say much. I just said, "Your mother wants the world to believe she's happy. Sometimes people try to fix their lives by pretending." He looked at me for a moment, then turned off the video and put his phone down. That small act, putting the phone down, said more than words ever could. Noah was sitting on the rug nearby, building a tower out of blocks. He looked up and asked, "Grandma, can I tell you something?" I smiled. "Of course." He leaned closer and whispered like it was a secret, "I wish Mom was more like you." I froze for a second. I didn't know what to say to that. He was too young to understand how heavy those words were, but they hit me hard. I pulled him into my arms and said softly, "Your mom loves you in her own way." He looked up at me. "Then why does she always sound mad?" I brushed his hair back and whispered, "Because sometimes grown-ups forget that love doesn't have to be loud." He nodded, and that was the end of it. But his words stayed with me all night. After the kids went to bed, I sat in the living room with the clock ticking beside me, the same clock that had been quietly recording the truth. I plugged the camera into my laptop and watched a few clips from the week. I saw Mason sitting alone, shoulders slumped, pretending he didn't care. I saw Ella holding Noah when he cried, telling him that everything would be okay even though she didn't believe it herself. I saw myself moving around the kitchen, keeping the house steady so they wouldn't see how worried I was. These children were living in two different worlds, the one their mother created online and the one that actually existed. I selected all the video files and sent them to Dr. Harper. My message was short. "When she comes back, be ready." Harper replied with a single line, "I'll be there." I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a while. The glow from the screen faded, but my thoughts didn't. I thought about how easily truth hides in plain sight, how families fall apart not because of one big lie, but 1,000 small ones no one dares to name. Sabrina had built her life on pretending, and now even her children could see the cracks. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt sad. Sad that it had come to this, that these kids had to grow up learning what dishonesty looks like before they ever learned what love feels like. I walked to their rooms before I went to bed. Mason was asleep with his phone next to him, a half-written message still on the screen. Ella's sketchbook was open beside her pillow. Another drawing, this one of a small house with light in only one window. Noah was curled up with his blanket, whispering to himself. I stood there for a long time, then whispered, "You deserve better than this." When I went back to my room, I opened Thomas's letter again and read one line over and over. "Teach the world to remember your kindness through action." That's what I was doing in my own quiet way. Not by shouting, not by fighting, but by showing them what truth looks like when someone refuses to look away. I didn't want to destroy their mother. I wanted to save what little was still good in this family. The storm came fast that night, the kind that covers the whole sky in white and makes the world disappear. Dr. Harper had sent the files hours ago, everything I'd collected from the clock, the iPad, the messages. She didn't say much, just wrote, "He deserves to know. Now." Ryan didn't call first. He didn't text. He just drove. Harper told me later he left Boston before midnight, still wearing his work clothes, his tie loose, snow hitting his windshield so hard he could barely see the road. The drive from the city to Maple Hollow usually took 3 hours. That night, it took him 6. When his car finally pulled up to the house, the headlights cut through the snow like two thin swords. I was in the kitchen waiting. The kids were asleep upstairs. The whole house was quiet except for the wind and the ticking clock. He didn't knock. He just opened the door, his coat soaked, eyes red. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking on the word. I didn't ask how much he already knew. I just pointed to the living room. The laptop was on the table, the screen already open, the first video paused, Sabrina laughing into her phone, calling me the sweetest old fool. He sat down slowly, his hands shaking as he pressed play. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the wind outside, and her voice coming from the speakers. He watched clip after clip, the children fighting, Ella crying, Mason shouting, Sabrina's laughter with the man in the black jacket. The last video was the one Ella had unknowingly drawn, Sabrina and the stranger in the hotel, smiling like nothing in the world could touch them. Ryan didn't look away once, not even when the tears started. He pressed his hand to his mouth as if trying to hold something in. When it was over, he just sat there. The room was dark except for the glow from the laptop shining against his face. It made him look both older and younger at the same time, like a child realizing the world isn't what he thought. Finally, he whispered, "How long have you known?" I stayed by the doorway. "Long enough?" He nodded slowly, still staring at the screen. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I took a breath. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head, but no words ever seemed right. "Because, Ryan," I said quietly, "you wouldn't have believed me. You needed to see it with your own eyes." He looked up at me then, really looked, the way he hadn't in years. There was no anger, no blame, just sadness, the kind that sits deep in a man who's realizing what he's lost. He closed the laptop gently like he was afraid it might break. "She lied about everything," he said almost to himself. "Everything." I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak. I could feel the weight of every unspoken thing between us, the years of silence, of him defending her, of me holding back because I didn't want to lose him. Then he whispered, "I thought I was keeping the peace. I thought if I worked harder, she'd love us again." I squeezed his shoulder. "You can't make someone love you by suffering for them." He nodded, still crying. He hadn't cried like that since Thomas's funeral. I remember because back then, I told him that tears were proof of love, not weakness. Now, watching him cry again, I felt both pain and relief. Pain, because I knew what this truth would cost him. Relief, because the lie was finally dead. When he finally spoke again, his voice was low, steady. "What do I do now?" I looked toward the stairs where the children slept. "You start by protecting them. Then you start by forgiving yourself." He nodded, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "And her?" I didn't answer right away. I thought of Thomas's letter, of the line that had carried me through all these years. "Teach the world to remember your kindness through action." So I said, "The truth will take care of her." He sat there for a long time, just listening to the wind. Then he said quietly, "Mom, I'm sorry." "For what?" I asked. "For not seeing you. For letting her turn me against you." My throat tightened. "You see me now?" I said. He nodded. "Yeah," he whispered. "I do." We stayed like that for a while. Him sitting, me standing beside him, the snow still falling outside. No yelling, no revenge, no noise. Just truth, raw and undeniable. When he finally stood up, he hugged me. It wasn't a quick hug. It was long, heavy, the kind that makes you realize how long it's been since someone held you like that. As he pulled away, I said softly, "Blind love can make people deaf, but justice always finds a way to speak louder." He looked at me, his eyes clear for the first time in years. "Then let's start listening." The blizzard came with no warning, the kind that turns the world white and erases sound. The windows rattled, the old house groaned, and the clock on the mantel ticked steady through the storm. I stood by the window, watching the headlights approach through the snow. A car fought its way up the driveway, slow, weaving, determined. Then it stopped. Sabrina stepped out, dragging her suitcase behind her, her red coat sharp against the gray of the storm. She didn't even cover her head. She looked almost happy. Maybe she thought she was coming home to another easy victory, another weekend of pretending. When she opened the door, her voice came out bright and false. "Mom, kids, I'm back." Then she stopped. Her smile faltered when she saw the living room. Ryan was sitting on the couch. Next to him was Dr. Harper, a folder on her lap. 2 CPS workers stood quietly by the wall. The children were there too, Mason with his arms crossed, Ella sitting close to me, Noah clutching her hand. No one said a word. The only sounds were the wind outside and the slow, steady ticking of Thomas's clock. Sabrina looked around the room, her confidence cracking. "What is this?" she said, forcing a laugh. "A family meeting? Intervention night?" Ryan stood. His face was calm, but his hands were shaking. "Sit down, Sabrina." She hesitated, then tried to smile again. "Ryan, what's going on? Why is CPS here? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the laptop on the table. He opened it, and the blue light from the screen filled the room. Sabrina's expression shifted. Confusion first, then tension, then the faintest trace of fear. The first video played. Her voice filled the room. She's old-fashioned, but she tries. Then another. Her yelling at Mason, Ella crying in the background, the sound of a door slamming. Then the last one, the video from Miami. Sabrina smiling in the arms of the man in the black jacket. No one moved. No one breathed. When the final clip ended, the room stayed silent. Only the wind outside moved, brushing against the windows like it was waiting for something. Sabrina's hands started to tremble. She looked at Ryan, then at me, then at the children. "Ryan," she whispered, "please. This isn't what it looks like. Ryan's voice was low but steady. "Then explain it." "I just wanted to make our life better," she said quickly. "Everything I did was for the family." "For the family?" Harper repeated softly. "Do you think manipulation, lies, and neglect make a family stronger?" Sabrina's voice cracked. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Ella stood up, her voice small but firm. "You hurt us anyway." Sabrina turned toward her. "Sweetheart, you don't understand." But Ella stepped back. Mason stood beside her. "We understand enough," he said quietly. Sabrina dropped her suitcase. The sound echoed through the house. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were wide, pleading. "Evelyn, you believe me, right? You know I didn't mean it." I looked straight at her. "I believe what I see." She took a step forward. "You think you're saving this family? You're destroying it." I shook my head slowly. "No, you already did. I'm just showing the truth." She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Her face went from anger to panic to something that almost looked like shame. Then, finally, she broke. Her knees gave way and she sank to the floor, covering her face with her hands. "I just wanted to feel loved," she whispered. "I wanted to matter." Ryan turned away. He couldn't look at her. I took a slow breath and said quietly, "You could have mattered without hurting everyone else." Noah started to cry. Ella ran to me and buried her face in my coat. Mason stood frozen, torn between anger and sadness. CPS stepped forward, calm and professional. One of them spoke gently to Ryan, explaining the next steps: safety plans, temporary custody, legal proceedings. I didn't hear all of it. My ears were ringing, my heart too full. Sabrina sat on the floor, shaking. For the first time, there was no mask, no fake smile, no camera. Just a woman staring at the ruins she'd built herself. The wind outside howled louder, pushing against the windows like it wanted in. But inside, the house stayed still, silent except for the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Ryan finally spoke. His voice cracked, but he didn't raise it. "You don't get to come back here and pretend, Sabrina. Not after this." She looked up at him, tears streaking her makeup. "Please, Ryan, please." He didn't answer. He just looked at the children. "Go upstairs," he said softly. "It's over." They went, slow and quiet, like they understood this wasn't a victory, just the end of something that should have ended long ago. When they were gone, Sabrina turned to me again. "You think you won, don't you?" I stood still. "I didn't come here to win," I said. "I came here to stop the losing." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked smaller now, fragile in a way that almost made me pity her. Almost. The storm outside began to die down. The howling turned to soft wind, the kind that carries what's left of the snow away. I glanced at the clock. The blue light from the camera still blinked faintly, steady and alive. I looked at her one last time. "You built your life on noise, Sabrina. But in the end, silence is what tells the truth." She lowered her head, and for the first time since I'd known her, she said nothing. The CPS workers guided her out. The door closed. The house was quiet again. Truly quiet. Ryan stood by the window watching the snow fade. He turned to me. "What happens now?" I touched his arm. "Now," I said softly, "we rebuild." The clock ticked once more, the sound clear, final, alive. It happened the next morning. The storm had passed, leaving the world clean, white, and unnervingly quiet. the kind of silence that makes every sound matter. Sabrina hadn't slept. She sat on the couch all night, her phone in her hand, scrolling through messages, making calls that no one answered. Her face was pale, her hair tangled, but her voice still carried that same sharp edge. When the knock came at the door, she jumped. Ryan stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, watching. I was in the kitchen making tea. She turned toward me and snapped, "You think you've won, don't you? You and your little spy cameras?" I didn't answer. I'd learned that silence cuts deeper than any argument. Her voice rose. "You invaded my privacy. You recorded me without permission. I can sue you for that." Before I could speak, Dr. Harper stood up from her chair by the window. Calm, measured, unshaken. "Actually, you can't," she said. "Those recordings were made under a minor protection statute. Mrs. Carter acted within the law." Sabrina blinked. "That's ridiculous." Harper stepped closer, her tone firm but even. The devices were registered through the Vermont Child Safety Initiative. Any guardian with reasonable suspicion of abuse has the legal right to collect evidence. You'd know that if you'd paid attention to your court agreements. Sabrina's face twisted. You set me up." Harper shook her head. "You set yourself up." That was when the second knock came, louder this time. Ryan opened the door. 2 officers entered, snow still clinging to their jackets. One of them, Detective Jensen, held a folder in his hand. His expression was polite, but his eyes were cold. "Mrs. Sabrina Carter?" he said. Sabrina straightened up, trying to gather what little pride she had left. "Yes?" He unfolded a paper and read clearly. "You are under arrest for tax fraud, falsified financial documents, and obstruction of a financial audit. You have the right to remain silent." For a moment, no one breathed. Then she laughed, high-pitched, nervous. "You must be joking. This is insane. Ryan, tell them this is a mistake." Ryan didn't move. He didn't even look at her. The detective nodded toward one of the officers, who stepped forward and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Ma'am, please stand." She stepped back. "No, you can't do this. You can't." They took her wrist gently but firmly. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut was louder than the storm had been. Sabrina looked around, desperate, her voice breaking. "Ryan, don't let them take my kids, please." Ryan's voice came out steady, but his eyes were wet. "You already took them from yourself, Sabrina." She froze, staring at him like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. Then she started to shout, about lies, about betrayal, about how everyone had turned against her. The officers guided her toward the door, her words scattering like snow in the wind. "Ryan," she screamed again, "you'll regret this. All of you will." No one answered. The door closed behind her and the sound of the police car faded into the distance. The snow kept falling softly outside, as if the world had decided to start over. Inside, no one spoke for a while. Harper gathered her papers, calm as ever. Ryan stood by the window, staring into nothing. The children were upstairs. I could hear Noah humming softly to himself, unaware of what had just happened. I walked over to the mantel where the clock still ticked. The blue light blinked faintly, steady as a heartbeat. Ryan turned towards me. "Is it over?" he asked quietly. I looked out the window, the car lights already gone, the street silent again. "Not yet," I said, "but the hardest part is." He nodded, his shoulders sinking, the exhaustion of years finally catching up to him. Harper came to stand beside me. "You did the right thing, Evelyn," she said. I shook my head. The right thing doesn't always feel right. She gave a small, sad smile. "That's how you know it's justice." When she left, I stayed in the living room alone for a while. The house smelled faintly of tea and winter air. I sat down and looked at the space where Sabrina had been, the place she had filled with noise, pride, and lies. Now it was empty, and somehow peaceful. I thought about all the years I'd spent biting my tongue, trying not to stir conflict, trying to protect what little peace there was. But peace built on silence isn't peace at all. It's surrender. Tonight, though, my silence was different. It wasn't fear. It was final. I whispered to myself, forgiveness is a luxury some people haven't earned. But sometimes silence is the only way left to keep your soul intact. Then I reached over and turned the clock slightly, facing it back toward the window. Thomas's clock, the one that never stopped watching, never stopped ticking, had seen everything. And now it could finally rest. Spring came quietly, the way forgiveness sometimes does, not with grand gestures, but with sunlight that lingers a little longer each day. For months the house had sounded different. No shouting, no tension, no footsteps that made you brace yourself. Just the soft rhythm of ordinary life returning. I opened the front door that morning and felt the breeze rush in, warm, alive, carrying the smell of earth instead of snow. Light fell across the floorboards Thomas built, and for the first time in years it didn't feel like the house was holding its breath. Ryan moved back in last month. He said it was just until things settled, but I knew better. Sometimes people don't say I'm staying, they just stop leaving. He was different now, quieter, softer around the edges. He spent his mornings fixing things around the house, things that had been broken so long we'd learned to live around them. Mason was the first to ask if he could stay too. He said he wanted to learn how to build stuff. The first day, he and Ryan made a bookshelf in the garage. It leaned a little to the left, but they both stood back and looked at it like it was a masterpiece. Ella had taken over the corner by the window. She painted every day, not just sketches now, but full canvases. Her latest one was a family portrait. This time, no crack split it down the middle. Just 5 people standing together under a bright sky. Noah spent his afternoons in the yard, his hands always covered in dirt. He said he wanted to grow a tree that never dies. So we planted a small oak together near the fence where Thomas used to hang his tools. Every day Noah checks on it, whispering things only he and the tree understand. The laughter that had once been rare now filled the rooms easily. Sometimes it still startled me. That sound of happiness coming from a place that had once been so cold. I started something new, too. Harper had encouraged me, saying, "You've spent your life healing others, Evelyn. Don't stop now. Just change how you do it." So I turned the old dining room into a small classroom. Once a week, I host something I call community care. We sit in a circle, older neighbors, retired nurses, a few teenagers who want to learn, and I teach them simple things. How to check blood pressure, clean wounds, help someone who's fallen. But more than that, we talk. We listen. It's not a clinic. It's a place where people remember that kindness is a skill too. One afternoon, Harper came by. She stood in the doorway watching as I helped an old man wrap a bandage. When everyone left, she smiled and said, "You know, Eve, you didn't save them with that camera. You saved them with your heart." I laughed softly. Then maybe it took me this long to remember how to use it. We sat outside for tea. The sky was pale blue, the kind of color that feels earned after too much winter. The oak tree in the yard was still small, but its leaves were bright, alive. Harper said, "Do you ever miss the quiet?" I shook my head. "This kind of quiet? No. But the kind that comes after doing the right thing? Yes. That's the one I live for." Inside, I could hear Ryan reading to Noah, his voice steady. Ella was humming upstairs. Mason was hammering again, trying to fix a loose shelf. Each sound folded into the next, soft and real, like the house itself was learning to breathe again. I looked around and realized something I hadn't in years. I wasn't lonely anymore. I thought of Thomas then, his letter, his voice, his words. If the world forgets your kindness, teach it to remember through action. So I have. The house isn't perfect, neither are we. But we're learning together how to live honestly, without pretending, without fear. Sometimes at night, when the clock ticks softly in the hall, I imagine Thomas sitting across from me smiling. I tell him everything, about Ryan finding his strength again, about the children laughing, about the way the sunlight looks when it hits the old kitchen table. And in those moments, I feel him here, not in memory, but in peace. I wrote the letter on a Sunday morning. The house was still, only the soft sound of the clock and the occasional laugh of a child outside. The kind of morning that feels like the world has taken a deep breath and decided to let you think. It took me 3 tries to start. The first 2 drafts felt wrong, too angry, too cold. I didn't want my last words to her to sound like punishment. I wanted them to sound like truth. So I began again, slowly, with the honesty that had taken me a lifetime to learn. "Sabrina, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because my family does." I stopped there for a long time. The word forgive used to feel impossible. Too big, too soft, too unfair. But as I looked around the kitchen, sunlight spilling through the window, Ella's painting on the fridge, Ryan's laughter faint from the yard, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about letting her go. It was about freeing the rest of us. I wrote more, steady and simple. "You hurt people who trusted you. You broke what should never have been broken. But I have seen enough in my life to know this. People don't change through hate. They change when someone chooses peace over revenge. I hope one day you understand what that means. The children are doing well. Mason helps his father fix things around the house. Ella paints every day. Noah is growing a small oak tree in the yard. He says he's waiting for it to grow tall enough so you can see it from where you are. I don't know what your future looks like, Sabrina, but I hope it includes honesty. Because truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing strong enough to rebuild anything worth saving. Evelyn. When I finished, I read it twice. Once as a mother, once as a witness. Both versions of me agreed. It was time. Ella came into the room holding one of her drawings. "Grandma," she said shyly, "can I send this with the letter?" On the paper, she had drawn a family standing under a bright yellow sun. 5 figures, all holding hands. I looked closer and realized she had drawn Sabrina there too, standing beside them. "Why did you draw her?" I asked softly. Ella shrugged. "Because she's still part of us." I didn't answer right away. I just nodded and folded the picture carefully, placing it inside the envelope. That night, I left the letter on the table. Ryan found it after dinner. He didn't say anything. He just picked it up and read it in silence. His hand trembled slightly near the end. When he finished, he folded it back along the creases and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "You really forgave her," he said quietly. "I had to," I replied. "Someone has to stop the hurt from traveling any further." He nodded, and we didn't speak after that. There was nothing left to explain. The next morning, he mailed it for me. No ceremony, no words, just a small envelope dropped into a steel box, carried away to wherever. Time and consequence would take it. I don't know if Sabrina cried when she opened it. I don't know if she read it twice or tore it up. But I know it reached her. And that was enough. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't change the past. It just stops it from ruining the future. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it came all at once. The kind of warmth that seeps into your bones and reminds you that life always finds a way to return. The snow had melted into soft soil. The air smelled different, not of cold or fear, but of something clean, ready. I walked out into the garden behind the house, the same patch of land Thomas and I used to tend together. It looked smaller now, but maybe I had just learned to see it differently. I carried a small basket of seeds, tomatoes, the same kind he used to grow. I could almost hear him laughing beside me, saying, "Eve, you plant too close together. Give them space to breathe." I knelt down, pressing my hands into the dirt. The ground was cool, damp, alive. For years I'd been afraid to touch it, afraid of remembering everything that used to bloom here. But this time, I wasn't afraid. The kids were inside, their laughter echoing faintly through the open window. Ryan was fixing something in the shed, humming softly under his breath. The world felt safe again. Not perfect, but peaceful. I took one seed between my fingers, then another, pressing them gently into the soil. Each one disappeared beneath the earth like a small act of faith. While I worked, I thought about the people I'd loved and lost. Thomas, whose voice still lived in every quiet corner. Sabrina, whose choices had almost torn us apart. And Ryan, who finally found his way home. Forgiveness had not come easily. It never does. But as I planted those seeds, I understood something simple and true. Healing doesn't always look like winning. Sometimes it just looks like planting something new where pain used to live. When I finished, I stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from my hands. The light shifted through the trees, warm, gold, steady. I could feel it on my face. And in that stillness, the words came to me, not as a thought, but as a truth I'd been carrying for years. I used to heal others with my hands. Now, I heal myself with silence. The wind moved softly through the leaves. A robin landed on the fence. Somewhere, the old clock inside the house ticked once, twice, a heartbeat marking time, not loss. I looked back at the little wooden house, paint faded, roof mended, windows open. It was no longer a place of ghosts. It was home again. The camera of life, if there was one, would have pulled back then. Wide, slow, quiet. The house small against the green of the forest, the sunlight cutting through the last patches of melting snow. A woman in a blue cardigan stood in the garden, hands in the dirt, shoulders straight, eyes calm. The world was still but alive. The piano played somewhere in the distance, soft, steady, like the echo of a promise finally kept. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the warmth of peace. Not borrowed, not forced, but earned.